make defamatory comments or use abusive or vulgar language. You will have to come forward and state your name and address with zip code for the clerk, because we do not fill out a sheet for public hearing. Anyone who would like to, I will now declare a public hearing open on this particular item on Resolution 19R10. Anyone who would like to come forward and speak to the board on this particular item, please do so at this time. Or you can also form a line to come forward. Please come forward and state your name and address for the record, and once you've done that, you'll have 3 minutes to address the board. Anyone else who would like to speak, if they'd like to go ahead and start forming a line, would be great. Go ahead, ma'am.
Tony Nygren, 1824 Johnson Road, Germantown, Tennessee. I had no prior knowledge of speaking tonight. We were here with the Scouts, but I look at this plan, and this to me doesn't look like Germantown. This looks like something that should be an urban area. We were told there weren't going to be any more apartments, and it looks like in 2018, before the election, there was 0 apartments. There is 0 multifamily dwellings, but now it looked like there was 320. So as I sit here, I'm a little concerned and confused. I know that the traffic in that area is already roads, our families, and really think about that and vote the way your constituents would like you to vote. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Nygren. If you'd like to come forward, sir, and state your name and address with zip code for the record.
Samuel Andrick, 7946 Ashbrook Cove, 38138. Thank you. Reiterating what was just said, but in addition, asking the question, who are we? Who is Germantown? My entire life, I've been a resident of Germantown, and up until the past few years, it seems like we've understood what that identity is. Small town feel, close to the city, single family houses, that kind of thing. And now all of a sudden it's turned into apartments, commercial, everywhere you go. I'm not against growth, I'm not against change, I'm not against improving the way things are around here. That's all great. And I'm not against everything that's happened. However, having a moratorium on apartments was all great, but it's clearly was temporary. It's very concerning now that you're going to add several hundred new apartments in an area that's already congested. Just to kind of itemize this, between Briarbrook and Kirby, there are 9 streetlights already. You're proposing to add another one right after that, and then somehow squeeze one into Park Avenue and in the intersection at Poplar and Kirby, which is about, the length of a football field. I'm tired of streetlights everywhere. It's a disaster. I have to drive from Poplar to Midtown already. And I mean, that's, in essence, the question. Who are we? Do we want to be Midtown? Do we want to be downtown? Because I can move there right now if I want to. There's a reason I don't live there, and I don't want to see it come here.
Thank you, sir. Anyone else who'd like to come forward, please come forward, state your name and address and zip code for the record, please.
Sandy Davis, 2857 Old Elm Lane, Germantown, Tennessee, 38138. It just doesn't seem to matter how many of us come up here, how many blogs are started, how many forums are started, how many people stand up and tell you over and over and over again, this city, the reason we moved here was because it was like a small town. And, it was a highly sought after area long before you all blew in. And now all of a sudden, the rules go out the window, the restrictions go out the window, more traffic, the stress on our infrastructure, the flooding. You cannot have this kind of dense development and think that it is not going to affect our daily lives. But we all know you're going to do it anyway. And the vote will be just as the vote always is. It'll be a 3-2 split. Because there's some of you, and I don't think you're representing 7% of the residents. I don't think you care what they think. I think what you're doing is representing the developers. And that's not how you ran to get into office. You ran claiming that you were not for more apartments. And then you instituted a so-called moratorium that you let expired while you took leave. And then you came back in and you changed the wording from apartments to mixed use. It's been one trick after the other. And I think the residents are starting to clearly see this. And it's not just a handful of us. Go to the forum. Look at how many people are viewing what we're writing. But like I said, I have no doubt it will be a 3-2 vote because it always is.
Thank you, Ms. Davis. Anyone else like to come forward and speak? Please come forward and state your name and address for the record, including your zip code.
Pauline Latham, 6958 Country Road, 38138. I want to go on about the traffic because I live in the neighborhood, and I don't know how many people here actually drive through that intersection at rush hour. I would say the average wait time right now there is probably 20 minutes that people just sit and wait to go through, and there's no other option for them. This, in turn, these new traffic lights is going to drive more traffic onto Neshoba, and before you know it, Neshoba will be like Quail Hollow, where we try to get around traffic on Poplar. It's going to be a disaster there. You all probably stay east of that area, but the people around me know what it's like. I also want to just address the overall question of what this metropolitan area is, because we aren't growing just in general. Have you noticed? We just earned an award for have the sixth most out-migration of any city or metropolitan area in the country. So who do we expect to attract? I don't understand. Are people going to move out of our older complexes into these newer complexes? And if that happens, your own study said that the older complexes start having more school children because they're cheaper. And already we have empty apartments, as was pointed out earlier. So do you realize what the competition is? Besides just in Germantown, all of the new apartments by Shelby Farms, all of the new ones downtown, all of the new ones in Midtown, where are the people coming from? I don't get it. Who's doing the marketing surveys? And besides that, I asked the marketing people or I didn't, someone else did. We asked the marketing people if there were going to be any incentives being asked for by the developers. Watch that, okay? Watch the incentives, because he said he didn't know. I take that to mean a yes. So we'll just wait and see. That would not be a popular option. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Latham. Is there anyone else who would like to come forward and speak to the board at this particular time? Anyone else who would like to come forward and speak to the board on this item on the agenda? Third and last call. Anyone who would like to come forward and speak on this particular item? See no one come forward. That concludes the public hearing portion of this item on the agenda this evening. Is there a motion to approve Resolution 19R10 for the Carrefour at the Gateway Plan Development Revised Outline Plan?
So moved.
There's a motion.
Second.
There's a motion and a second. Alderman Owens, would you like the floor at this time or not?
Yeah, sure, Mayor. Thanks.
Sure, go ahead.
Talk a little bit about, well, I guess first of all, what we're talking about tonight is an amendment to the outline plan to allow a multifamily residential component to be added to the mix of uses that are in this outline plan. I think that's important that we keep an eye on that. I'd like to talk about some characteristics that I think are important for mixed-use developments to be successful. They need to be walkable, they need to be sustainable, pedestrian-friendly, they need to be well-designed with high-end architecture, high-end landscape architecture, and they need to have usable open spaces or gathering spaces for the residents. And critical to that is that there needs to be true mixed use. It needs to be residential, retail, office. We've heard the cliche of live, work, play, and sometimes that gets tired, but it's relevant. In my opinion, all of these descriptions fit the proposed Care for development. I think it's an opportunity, what we've seen before us is an opportunity that most communities would be very jealous of, envious of, and really would dream about. The economic development seems to be, we're assaulted if we mention the term economic development as we're going after this money, but economic development is a real thing, and that is important for our community to keep the services that we need for our community. I mean, we all enjoy a great park system. Our school system is the best in the state, and we've got police that are second to none. Fire, we've got the fire engine that's outside. These things cost a lot of money. And if we don't want to put that burden on the backs of our residential property tax, of our residential property owners, we've got to do something in small areas in our gateways that can bring in that revenue and create economic development. And I think this project fits that perfectly. We know that I've spoken to several residents who are very excited about the project in terms of the additional dining choices, the additional retail choices. We know that Class A office space is in high demand in the Poplar Corridor, so we know that this is going to be very successful. The multifamily proposed in this mixed-use setting is a very high end with high rent and will attract young professionals and empty nesters. We will see few, if any, if Thornwood is an example, school-aged children and their families residing in these units. So there will be little to no impact on our school population. The additional residential component within this development will provide support for the retail and the office space. I think this outline plan is better than what was previously approved with office and retail only and hotels. It supports and follows, and this is important, it supports and follows the Western Gateway Plan, which was designed through public meetings. This wasn't something that any of us just flung up. This came through a public charrettes, public input from residents, from landowners, architects, stakeholders, and this is what city planning really, to me, is about. We're creating a plan through a public participation process. We're implementing that plan, and finally, we're able to see the benefits of that plan come to fruition. I think it's also about, in my opinion, creating special places that add value to our city and that can retain value for our city, and that is what I envision Care for doing. I think we could all agree, whether it's aldermen, residents, that we would like to see special places that retain value in our city. We may disagree on density, we may disagree on building height or setbacks even, but this will create a special place that will retain its value for years to come. It's a complex process that a developer has to go through to pull off a mixed-use development. We said that before. It's a lot of money, a lot of time, a lot of effort, and it's difficult. And so I appreciate what the developers are willing, the risk they're willing to take to put this out there. I wish this whole conversation could be centered around, not about apartments, but around special places, because this is not a standalone apartment complex. This is a true mixed-use development that envisions all of those categories and can be successful and make Germantown, this part of Germantown at least, a great place to be. I think, Mayor, I'll just stop right there. I'm almost out of time, and I'll reserve my comments for the next round.
Thank you, Alderman Owens. Alderman Yonda, you had seconded the motion. Would you like the floor at this time?
No, I'll reserve for later.
Floor is open for comments, questions. Vice Mayor?
I would just like to thank Alderman Owens. I appreciate all of your comments. I know there are members of the Planning Commission that are here this evening, and I think for anyone that has watched the process, I know that there were very thoughtful and thoughtful deliberations that went on during that meeting. I think that to insinuate that anyone on this dais has a motivation that is to benefit ourselves or a developer, I can speak to that myself. That is false for me personally. And one of the things that we're charged with is to make a good decision, not only for the residents, 40,123 that are here today, but for those that are going to be coming, and how our city grows. That is one of the things that with an outline plan, as it has ebbed and flowed, of what it looks like now. Alderman Owens' comments as far as special places that retain value for our city, that is, I think, the definition of what good planning is. And I believe that this accomplishes that, and I look forward to more discussion.
Thank you, Vice Mayor. Floor is open. Alderman Sanders?
Thank you, Mayor. I'd like to ask a couple of questions of the traffic study, the count that was on the slide.
Sure, if the representative, Mr. Sweat, could come forward. Go ahead, Alderman.
The previous plan had no apartments. It was 2 hotels. We're only decreasing that by 66 rooms or keys, I believe he said. But how can, I don't see the slide now, but I don't remember the exact numbers, but how, with people living here now, 320 apartments, how do we say that, or how do we come up with the numbers that the traffic count or trips per day decreases when you have at least 320 individuals that stay on that property every day?
Go ahead, sir, if you can answer that question.
So there's a couple reasons for that. The first is just the general trip generation rate for office versus residential. So as a part of the plan, going from 2018 to 2019, while they're adding 320 units, they're reducing the office by 120,000 square feet. The general average trip generation for an office space is about 9.5 trips per 1,000 square feet. Multifamily residential for this type is about 5.5 trips per unit. The average unit size they have is between 700 to 900 square feet of a unit. So while it's not exactly 1-to-1, 1,000 square feet of office to 1 unit, the trip generation rate is lower for a residential unit than it is for 1,000 square feet of office. So that aids in the reduction of traffic, is swapping the 110,000 of office for 320 units. And then also you get the interaction between the uses. So whereas before in the 2018 plan, you only had that 440,000 square feet of office, now you've got the 320,000 square feet of office plus 320 residential units. Now you have the opportunity to live in the development and work in the development. So you have the opportunity for the interaction between the mixed use or the multi-use on the development. And so that reduces the amount of traffic that is generated from the external road network that is actually accounted for internal to the site.
Thank you, sir. Go ahead, Alderman.
That kind of leads into what my next question was then, a reduction, though not much, of parking spaces being provided. That is decreased, it appears.
Mm-hmm.
So with additional folks that, I know you're reducing your retail, or your office space, but people that may live there, and as you say, they may also work there, so that parking space is not becoming available during the daytime if they don't leave the property. So how do we, or how did you determine the necessary number of spaces per this square footage?
Go ahead, sir.
So again, there's 2 contributing factors to that. One would be the parking demand ratios. So first of all, a typical office demand is about 3 spaces per 1,000 square feet. A residential, you typically reserve 1 space per unit. So again, you have a lower demand from total number of spaces when you compare the office versus the residential. So again, you remove 110,000 square feet of office, replace that with 320 residential units, and you have a lower parking demand for those. But again, you also get an overlap of the relationship between the residential and the office parking. Your typical office demand for parking is from 7 a.m. to 5 to 6 p.m. Your typical demand for residential is from 6 p.m. to 7 a.m. And so some of these spaces can actually be shared between the uses. You will have some areas of parking that will be dedicated for office, some areas of parking that will be dedicated for residential, but then you'll have a certain number of spaces that can be shared use between the uses on site. And so by again, taking out the office, replacing it by residential, you have a couple different benefits that you get to experience, which is both the decrease in demand ratio, but also the interaction between the uses on site.
Thank you. Go ahead, Alderman.
You. Also had a question for the developers. I met with the Cannons several months ago, and I asked them if they would consider ownership of these units, condominiums, so to speak, and was told that they may have looked at it, but they didn't think that would work. And would you explain to our residents? I believe it might make it a little more palatable if we had ownership in a development such as this rather than renting, but why would condominiums not work?
Well,
Go ahead, sir.
I'm not saying they wouldn't work. It's more, it gets back to the main reason would be a management issue. It's a lot easier to have one owner that owns the multifamily, that controls that multifamily, that you know, for whatever reason, if you're living in your condo unit and Mayor Palazzolo decides to, y'all are best friends, and he decides to move out, and Mary Ann moves in next to you, and you know, y'all do not get along, that's one of the reasons that, like, it's easier to move somebody on site if they're a apartment user versus a condo user where you're stuck in a situation with somebody. It's also more difficult to just generally manage a condo unit complex. It's usually a lot easier management.
Thank you,
Management's the main
thank you, Mr. Cannon. That concludes your time on the floor. Further discussion? Alderman Massey,
Sure, Mayor. Mr. Ross,
please come forward. Director Ross.
who was the applicant when the Western Gateway was rezoned in 2014?
Alderman Massey, I don't have that in front of me.
Well, I'd like to make a motion that we take a brief break while Mr. Ross looks up that information.
There's been a motion to go into recess. As chair, I'll entertain that. Is there a second?
Second?
So motion and a second. Please call the roll.
Alderman Sanders,
Yes.
Vice Mayor Gibson,
Yes.
Alderman Massey,
Yes.
Alderman Owens,
No.
Alderman Yonda.
No.
The motion carries. We'll take a 5-minute recess. If you could hold the alderman's time, please. And as such, we'll let the director catch his breath for a moment. I would just ask the board that in future, that type of information could obviously be acquired, asked for during the week, and could be prepared much quicker, opposed to putting staff on the spot. Go ahead, you have, the time is resume time, please. Were you able to find the information for the Alderman, Director Ross?
Yes, sir. I was able to pull the agenda sheet from the third reading of the rezoning from October 13th, 2014. And as part of that, the minutes of the Planning Commission, which were August 5th, 2014, show that the City of Germantown was the applicant for the Western Gateway Small Area Plan rezoning.
Thank you, Director. Continue with any questions, Alderman?
Mr. Ross, when were you employed by the City of Germantown?
February 10th, 2014.
Was that before the rezoning of the Western Gateway?
Yes, sir. The
So
rezoning of the Western Gateway was in August of 2014.
So you were here when the Western Gateway was rezoned?
Yes, sir.
And I have a question for the City Attorney, Mayor. Mr. Ross, you can stay if you don't mind.
Sure.
City Attorney, have you reviewed the process that was used to rezone the Western Gateway? Was it legally valid for the City of Germantown to act as the applicant?
I have not examined it.
Given what's before the board, would you recommend that we go forward with this vote without you having the opportunity to first determine whether or not there's even a legal rezoning of the Western Gateway in place?
I can't really comment on whether it's legal or not. The question I assume that you're asking is whether the city is a proper applicant. Anybody in this body or Planning Commission is entitled to make a motion to rezone property. If the city speaks through this board, so I'm really not sure that I understand what your problem with the legality of it is.
Well, the charter outlines specifically who's allowed to request a rezoning change. And it does not specify that the City of Germantown is a permitted body or individual to make such a request. And it's somewhat problematic because it fails to disclose the true beneficiary of a rezoning request, for example. And so I have always questioned whether or not it was appropriate for the City of Germantown to rezone these areas of smart growth on behalf of developers. And so I think that that's still a question that really needs to be resolved, because it could be that we still need to go back through the process of determining whether or not the Western Gateway should even be rezoned for smart growth.
I think it's a matter of semantics.
Well, would you be willing to put your opinion into a formal legal opinion with the backing of Birch, Porter, and Johnson?
I would be glad to consider that, yes.
Well, would you be willing to do it? You said consider it if the board, if the board asked you to do that. Does your firm represent the Cannons?
No, sir.
Okay, so no conflicts there. I would like to make a motion for the board to actually make a formal request of the city attorney and his law firm to review the facts as they pertain to the rezoning of the Western Gateway and the other smart growth nodes, and give a formal written legal opinion about whether or not the rezoning was in fact valid.
The city administrator, go ahead.
I believe in conferring with Mr. Ross that the board has already been provided that information by former city attorney David Harris. It's come up on a couple other occasions, but I believe the board has that answer, and the answer is yes, absolutely. The city can be an applicant, and the rezonings that have taken place under that action and approved by this body have been memorialized, and they are absolutely, I'm not the city attorney, are legally and binding.
Mayor,
Yes, go ahead.
if I may add, Mr. Massey's statement was a little incorrect in that the zoning code is a little ambiguous about who can be an applicant. It says this board, planning commission, members of residents of Germantown. However, the charter does provide for the ability of the city of Germantown to regulate the land uses within. It's in section 2-0222 of the charter, if I'm remembering my citation correctly.
And I think probably a good example of that is the rezoning of the Owens property, which I believe this board is supporting going forward, where Mayor Palazzolo was the applicant of that.
That's different, though. The mayor is actually
It's a rezoning.
Provided, is specified in the rezoning as an individual who can make such a request. The city of Germantown is not. They may be able to regulate land uses, but that doesn't mean they can also rezone property. And so there's still a question that needs to be answered. We've had speculative.
You have reached your time.
Mayor, I'm sorry. You're letting your employees speak, so I should be able to speak and rebut what they said.
If you'd let me conclude, you had started a motion earlier. Would you like to rephrase your motion?
I would like to make a motion for the board to request a formal written legal opinion from the city attorney in Birch, Porter, and Johnson to determine whether or not the city of Germantown legally rezoned the Western Gateway and other smart growth nodes.
Well, I think what you're moving toward is whether the city can be an applicant. Is it safe to say?
I stated my motion. I think that by making it broad enough, this will making it more broad than simply determining whether or not the...
Thank you. You've made a motion. You brought that forward. Is there a second?
I'll second the motion.
It's a motion and a second for asking for an attorney. Now, again, the city staff and the attorney have made mention that there has been an opinion granted.
There has not been a legal opinion. There has not been a formal legal opinion.
That's fine. We'll dig through the files, so to speak.
Well, you're entering incorrect information to mislead the board before they vote. That's not right.
I'm not doing either one of those things. I'm restating what was mentioned earlier. So motion and a second, properly motioned and seconded. Please call the roll.
Alderman Sanders,
Yes.
Vice Mayor Gibson,
No.
Alderman Massey,
Yes.
Alderman Owens,
No.
Alderman Yonda.
No.
The motion fails. We return to the original motion. The floor is open for discussion. Who would like the floor? We have a motion, and go ahead, Alderman Sanders.
Thank you. When this application was originally brought, the original outline plan in 2018, there were no apartments listed to be included because we had a moratorium in place in Germantown. But with that gone, now we see 320 apartments or multifamily dwellings being included, which does not surprise me at all. I do believe that the majority of our residents in Germantown are opposed to new apartments being built or placed within our city limits. I also believe this board, or at least a simple majority of the board that sits here now, agreed with that at the time because they did pass a moratorium to allow for some study of the effect of apartments on our police and fire, which was conducted. City staff did a great job looking at those items and presented that to the board. We then asked for a temporary extension to allow for some changes in our code or definitions of what apartments or standalone apartments were, what should be continued to be allowed and what should be excluded. Looking at this plan, even though we haven't concluded our work on that resolution and these new definitions and the change that is coming forward, it appears to me that that this current plan would fit within what has been proposed so far in that resolution. But after having said that, I don't believe, after the study was conducted and presented, that changed the public opinion about apartments. Whether or not it has an effect on our police and fire calls, residential versus apartment complexes, I believe they still do not support apartments being built within our city. I have to base that on conversations I've had with folks during the time I ran for office and also since I've been elected. And I just don't believe the public opinion has changed. As a previous speaker spoke about apartments, or these particular apartments being higher end and not affecting our schools, you have to realize, though, those empty nesters that may move out of Poplar Estates or some other location within our city into these apartments opens up a residential housing unit that most likely would have a younger family that would be raising a family that would likely have children eventually within our schools. So, maybe the immediate effect of a person moving into one of these units may not affect the schools, but we got to also look at the bigger picture of where those folks may be coming from and where the housing types that they're vacating in order to downsize because they're empty nesters. So just having said that, I don't believe I'm going to be able to support this agenda item or the resolution tonight because I don't believe our residents have changed their opinion or desire to change the community that we've had historically being residential, owner-occupied, and I just wanted to put that on the record. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Alderman, and your comments are greatly appreciated and valued. Floor is open. Any further discussion? Please call the roll.
No, Mayor, I had a...
Go ahead, Alderman Massey.
Mr. Sweat, could you approach the podium, please?
Please come forward. You can go to either one, whichever one's more comfortable for you. Okay, just make sure the green button's on.
Mr. Sweat, just to remind the public, you're an employee of Kimley Horn. You do the traffic studies for the city of Germantown, and you did the traffic study for the Western Gateway, if I'm not mistaken. Is that correct?
That's correct. Myself, I did not work on the Western Gateway itself, but I did work on the traffic for this specific development.
But your firm worked on it, and,
Yes, sir.
and they are a consultant for the city of Germantown.
That's correct.
Have y'all done any consulting work on behalf of Care4 in addition to the city of Germantown?
Correct.
You have done work on behalf of the Care4 developer.
That's correct.
So you are doing work for the developer at the same time you are consulting for the city of Germantown.
Not on the same project at the same time, though. We did the study for the Western Gateway study for the city of Germantown 3 to 4 years ago, and now for Care4, we have updated the traffic information to reflect the current uses and intensities on the property.
And on whose behalf did you do the recent update for the traffic study?
Care4.
So you did the updated traffic study on behalf of Care4, and the previous traffic study was done on behalf of the city of Germantown.
Correct.
Okay, so okay, that's enough. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Mr.
So, real quick, just to clarify, that study that was done for Western Gateway was for the whole corridor, not just Care4, but it included Fountain Square, the other developments along this corridor, the additional trip generation, if those were to redevelop as well. So it wasn't just Care 4 in that original study.
I understand.
Okay.
Thank you, sir. Go ahead, continue with your questions or discussion.
So when you hear aldermen say that they don't take into consideration the profits for a developer, that's disingenuous. When you hear aldermen say that you have to consider economic development, well, the economic development is the profits for the developers. And so one of the goals of smart growth is to increase the density and allow for greater profits. Now, the benefit to the city is allegedly the fact that we will receive more tax revenue. But in order to receive that additional tax revenue, the developers have to receive greater profits. That's not a knock against the developers. That's their jobs, to make as much money as they possibly can. However, it's the responsibility of the elected officials to act in the interest of Germantown residents. And in my opinion, we failed to do that. The board, when they implemented the smart growth plan in 2013, 2014, appeared to be acting primarily in the interest of the developers. And that's why Germantown residents really have a hard time with what's taking place, because it's been betrayal after betrayal after betrayal of Germantown residents for the benefit of developers. Now, the question is, why are your elected officials putting the interest of developers over the interest of Germantown residents? I've been trying to find that out, and I've had a really hard time. The administration has been very evasive. They've concealed information from me. They have refused to answer questions, and I'm very suspicious of what's going on, and the residents of Germantown are naturally very suspicious of what's going on, because they don't understand why their elected officials appear to be making decisions that are detrimental to their families and their neighborhoods.
Does that conclude your remarks, sir?
No.
Continue.
The city charter, in our ethics section, says that the foundation of all government in American society is the trust of citizens in the integrity of public officials. By continuing to put developer profits over Germantown residents are losing faith in the integrity of the offices that we hold. I conclude my remarks.
Thank you, Alderman. Any further discussion? Alderman Owens.
Thanks, Mayor. As some of you know, I have an education background in city planning and a good deal of experience in this field. I think it's important that we point out that this development would not or could not reach the potential that it has without a true mixed-use setting. And what I mean by that is just office and retail, in my opinion and the opinion of other experts that I've spoken with, cannot reach the lasting value and lasting impact that this development can have without having a full mixed-use component, and that includes residential. I think it's important to talk about, when we talk about the benefits to developers, it's important to talk about that when a development does well, it is good for the residents of Germantown. Those taxes go to the citizens of Germantown. When we talk about another mixed-use development we have in our city, it's 30 acres, less than 30 acres, and that's Thornwood. And when it is completed, it will produce $1.5 million in total tax revenues. That's with the overall subdivision, but that's $1.5 million in total tax revenues. And the estimated debt service on Forest Hill Elementary, to give you a little bit of an example, is, and I've said this before, but it's less than that. It's $1.45 million. So Thornwood alone, with very minimal impact into our residences and residential neighborhoods, is going to pay for the debt service of an elementary school, and that's what I'm talking about. These services, when we're talking about who's going to win here, it's going to be our residents. Our residents are going to have to pay less taxes, and they're going to get the services that they desire and that we all desire. And I'm a resident, and so I speak soundly for that. I'd like to talk about residential in terms of being my opinion is that is a critical component of any mixed-use development and represents the live-work-play dynamic. I think that appropriate density must be present in order to support the retail and office as well as create the vibrancy and safety necessary to sustain the value of these developments. Creating the right mix of uses in these developments is a complex task, and it's not easy. However, if it's done right with a master developer, like we have here, and the appropriate percentages of residential and office and retail, the opportunity exists to create neighborhoods that will have lasting value for the municipality as well as its residents. And I think, put quite simply, without some type of residential component associated with mixed-use developments, they cannot be successful. I think it is critical that we amend this outline plan to allow for that mixed-use component of residential to be a part of it. I think that the outline plan tonight proposed fits with what was visioned with the residents and the stakeholders with the Western Gateway Plan. Those residents provided input and helped create our Western Gateway Plan. The Gateway Plan process took public input and created a plan that is sustainable, that creates revenues for our city. It's backed by a transportation plan, it's backed by an infrastructure plan, and it will create a gateway to our city that will be envied by other municipalities. I'm happy to support such a high-end development. I would sincerely request that my fellow aldermen do the same tonight. Thanks, Mayor.
Thank you, Alderman. Any further discussion? Vice Mayor.
Thank you, Mayor. One of the things that we've talked about is citizen input, and Alderman Owens mentioned that we are citizens, each of us that sit here, and we spend time in the community at events we go to on behalf of the city, events that we go to for personal reasons, whether it's at church or children's school events, those type of things. And when we look at input from citizens on this issue, for this particular agenda item, I've had 4 emails that were negative. I've spoken with several folks, as Alderman Owens mentioned, who are excited about the opportunities for this transition area on our very farthest boundary for our western neighbor. We started the moratorium conversation because we had concerns about the growth and how quickly the interest in apartments was coming here. So 18 months worth of intensive study by our staff. Mr. Heisman led that team that produced a 355-page document that looked at infrastructure, public safety. It looked at how our schools would be impacted by these multi-family dwelling units. And so when we make decisions, we make them based on having looked at that evidence. I think that this is a good project. I'm supportive of it. I will support it. But I support it because I've done my homework. Literally, we sent our economic community development director on a goose chase tonight to find out something that could have been discerned with an email or a phone call. We are working hard to make a good decision, and I do support this project. Thank you.
Thank you, Vice Mayor. Any other discussion on this particular item? Please call the roll.
Alderman Owens?
Yes.
Alderman Yonda?
Absolutely.
Alderman Sanders?
No.
Vice Mayor Gibson?
Yes.
Alderman Massey?
The
Mayor,
motion carries.
my mic wasn't on. I want to make sure there's no.
The item carries and is approved by a 3-2 vote. That takes us to item 11 on the agenda this evening. Approval of Americans with Disability Act ADA Transition Plan. We welcome to the podium Procurement Director Piefer and City Engineer Gwaltney. If you'd like to come forward and make your presentation to the board.
Thank you, Mayor. I'll make this as brief as possible. I believe all of you have looked at the ADA plan that's been submitted to you. I'll provide you with a few highlights and milestones to this date, and then Mr. Gwaltney will go over the 2 phases that are in the plan. Throughout the 40-plus years of the city's and ADA laws that are enacted, the city has adjusted and transitioned plans to meet those laws through those 40 years. Throughout that entire process, I won't go over every date, but it is an ever-flowing process for us to maintain our ADA compliance. And in doing so, we do those changes each year. And throughout our design processes. In 2017, as City Administrator alluded to earlier, well, we came to the board for our ADA resolution that identified me as the ADA coordinator, but also identified our process to move forward with a complete redo of our ADA plan going forward. That was completed. Our ECD staff worked truly hard to present and actually go and get funds to assist us with that after our staffs got through the inventory process, which is a difficult process, but the even more difficult process is the process that Kimley Horn was utilized through the RFQ process to assist us with. And I'll turn that over to Mr. Gwaltney for description on that.
Thank you, Ms. Piefer. In October of 18, the city entered into a professional services agreement with Kimley Horn and Associates to fully review and assess the city's programs, services, activities, infrastructure, and facilities to determine deficiencies and/or barriers to access for those items, those items being the services, activities, infrastructure that the city maintains and owns, and then using barriers to folks with disabilities. The scope of the first phase of the project involved field inspection of the City Hall building, all signalized intersections throughout the city, also unsignalized intersections along 40 miles of sidewalk throughout the city, mainly clustered around city parks and schools where pedestrian activity is considered heavy. I've also just want to make sure you know that our consultant, Mr. Brian Schaumburg, is here to answer any specific questions you may have on the summary report that was provided to you. In that transition plan for phase one that covered the items I just mentioned, that is the finished product that you're being asked to approve tonight. That describes the deficiencies that were found, gives cost estimates to address those deficiencies, and also provides a timeline for addressing those. We're looking at a 25-year time frame at roughly somewhere between $400,000 to $500,000 per year. Phase two of the project, again, is going to be very similar to phase one, which is a field inspection of the remaining city facilities. It's going to be up to 10 city-owned buildings, 10 parks, 113 miles of sidewalk, and the remaining unsignalized intersections that are part of that 113 miles of sidewalk. That concludes my presentation. If you have any specific questions related to the summary report, again, Mr. Schaumburg will be able to assist.
Thank you, Mr. Gwaltney. Thank you, Ms. Piefer. Is there a motion to approve the City of Germantown's ADA Transition Plan Phase 1? Is there a motion?
So moved.
It's a motion by Alderman Sanders, seconded by Alderman Yonda. Any discussion? Alderman Sanders.
Thank you. This phase one plan, or this transition plan that we're working on tonight, has a cost of about $11 million. And an average, I guess, if it's passed, that we would attempt over the next 25 years to complete these items, and the average annual budget would be about $441,000. Is that correct, Mayor?
I'm getting the calculator right now, but go ahead. You have the floor.
That is correct.
Yes, that's what's listed.
The plan also does call for some larger items in some of those appendix. So is it fair to say that some years we may look at $400,000 in a budget, but other years we may have significantly higher costs?
Excellent question, Mr. Gwaltney. And I know, for instance, MPO just put out some ability to look at some things that we can apply to our needs, correct?
That is correct. And to answer your question too, Alderman, yes, there would be some years where priorities would be what we call heavier than other years. Then there's funding opportunities, for instance, on roadway improvement projects. ADA upgrades is always included in those type of projects where we have applied for funding, and that will take care of a major portion of it there.
Correct.
Thank you. Go ahead, continue.
And we did list on, are they listed on page 25? There are many opportunities for grants for various activities that are listed and the types of grants that are listed, and we're going to seek those. I just wanted to let the public know that we're not asking $11 million to come straight out of our property tax over this next 25 years, but we do have opportunities, as you mentioned, and we fully intend to pursue those, correct?
Mr. Gwaltney? Yes, it's been a time-honored tradition here at the city that we go out with hand fully exposed to ask for money. Go ahead, Alderman.
And after this phase 1 is approved, and we talked, you talked briefly about phase 2, that $11 million price tag likely will change, and as will the average annual budget we're going to request, correct?
That's correct.
But at this point, we don't know, or we really have no idea how much the difference is going to be, do we?
At this point, no, we don't. We just got started with phase 2. I mean, it's safe to say it's going to be substantial.
And although we're saying we would try to carry this out over a 25-year period, it is possible that could change over a period of time as we address some of these and find additional items as laws change. So it's possible that this, or we know, we've said this is a living, breathing document, so it's possible that it may be 30 years or 35.
Very, very true, yes.
And so, of course, if possible, we'll try to get as much done as we can in a shorter period of time as we can, but we're not setting this 25 years in stone, are we?
Go ahead.
No, we're not. We're putting, just to come up with a general budget, I mean, we have to assume something. I mean, if we had to assume something shorter, of course, a dollar amount would have gone up.
Yes, sir. And I appreciate that. I did meet with you earlier this week, and Ms. Pfeiffer, and I appreciate you meeting with me, and we did cover some of these things, and I just was wanting to point this out to the public. Some of the public see a price tag like this, and knowing that we already have indicated we may have to raise property tax in a year or two, when they see adding on $500,000 every year from now on the next 25 years, they get concerned. So I do appreciate your candid conversation that we had and the time you took to meet with me.
Thank you.
Thank you, Alderman. Any further discussion? Please call the roll.
Alderman Yonda,
Yes.
Alderman Sanders,
Yes?
Vice Mayor Gibson,
Yes.
Alderman Massey,
Yes.
Alderman Owens.
Yes.
The measure carries and passes. That brings us to the conclusion of the Board of Mayor and Aldermen's work for this evening. We are adjourned as a Board of Mayor and Aldermen. For those that are here tonight and would like to quietly file out, this would be a good time. We are now constituted as the board, or the City of Germantown's Beer Board, to hear 2 suspension revocation cases to come before this body. So as we adjourn the Board of Mayor and Aldermen's work, we are now in session as the Germantown Beer Board. Having said so, we have the first item on the agenda this evening. Our city prosecutor, Mr. Cates, is here as well. The Beer Board will hear the suspension revocation of beer license located at the Shell Food Mark at 9095 Poplar Avenue. Did I get that in the right order? Is that our first case, Mr. Prosecutor?
The first one, Mr. Mayor, is the suspension revocation.
My apologies. I was trying to conclude quicker. Let's move to item 12. Beer Board hearing for suspension, revocation of beer license for the Circle K located at 9113 Winchester Road. If the proprietor is here, if they could come forward, and if you'd like to go ahead and put on your case, Mr. Prosecutor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have, here today is Jennifer Taylor, who is here on behalf of Circle K. Circle K, as some background, they have had one prior incident before the city's beer board in 2016, and they were cited with a $500 civil penalty. The allegations in this matter are that on October 31, 2019, during an undercover sting investigation, a 20-year-old cooperating individual was able to purchase beer at that location. The cashier checked the identification of the cooperating individual, but nonetheless sold the beer. Ms. Taylor and I have spoken, and we have, and don't let me speak for you, but I believe that she has agreed to admit that the violation did occur. She advises that the individual who sold the cooperating individual that beer was immediately terminated. She described for me the compliance steps that they take for new employees and then for renewing employees as well. I have reviewed and have been provided with a history of what we've done in the past on these circumstances so that we can suggest something that would be consistent with historically how we have done things, and when we have had a matter where there has been already a first offense, but it has been in the not immediate past, but also not distant past, we have proposed a resolution, or the board has imposed an outcome of a suspended license for 30 days, or that a fine would be paid of $1,500. And Ms. Taylor, on behalf of Circle K, has agreed to that recommendation if it is consistent with the beer board's recommendation.
Thank you, Prosecutor Cates. I haven't seen Ms. Taylor step forward. You are entering, in essence, a plea of guilty this evening. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Is there a motion to find Circle K store located at 9113 Winchester Road guilty of a violation of the Germantown beer ordinance regarding selling beer to a minor? Is there a motion?
Move to approve.
There's a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
There's a motion and a second. We will wait for the second motion to field any questions. Without objection, that is. Please call the roll on admission of guilt. Go ahead.
Alderman Sanders.
Yes.
Vice Mayor Gibson.
Yes.
Alderman Massey.
Yes.
Alderman Owens.
Yes.
Alderman Yonda.
Yes.
Thank you, Beer Board. The admission of guilt has been properly recorded. Is there a motion to either suspend Circle K located at 9113 Winchester Road's beer license for 30 days or accept a fine of $1,500? Is there a motion?
So moved.
There is a motion. Is there a second?
I'm a second.
There's a motion and a second. Any discussion or questions of the city prosecutor? Please call the roll.
Alderman Sanders.
Yes.
Vice Mayor Gibson.
Yes.
Alderman Massey.
Yes.
Alderman Owens.
Yes.
Alderman Yonda.
Yes.
Thank you, Board. Your decision has been properly rendered and goes into the public record. I would just state on behalf of our police department and others in the community, please don't be back in a couple of years, okay? Thank you, all right? That brings us to item 13 on the agenda this evening, Beer Board hearing, suspension, revocation of beer license, Shell Food Mart, located at 9095 Poplar Avenue. If the proprietor could come forward and sit on the front row close to the podium. Prosecutor Cates, are you ready to put on your case?
I am. I have not had an opportunity to speak to this proprietor. If I may have about 45 seconds to speak to them.
Sure, we will
in the back of the
stand
room.
we will stand and not recess, but just here for you to consult. Prosecutor Cates, would you like to go ahead and continue with putting on your case?
I would. This matter is regarding the Shell Food Mart at 9095 Poplar Avenue. We have an officer here prepared to present the case, but I have spoken with the proprietor who, tell me your name. Identify yourself to the...
My name is Rick Mangiani.
Thank you,
sir. And then with him is the individual that actually made the sale, and I believe the Shell Market is agreeable to the disposition, similar to the disposition for the Circle K. They acknowledge that a violation has been made, and similarly, they are not a first offender. They had an earlier violation in 2017. It was a similar resolution in this case that a 20-year-old cooperating individual was sold beer. The violator checked the cooperating individual's identification and nonetheless sold the beer. Different from the Circle K, that employee is still works there, and the proprietor explained, and I think it's appropriate for him to address you directly and explain both how he dealt with that situation and how he proposes to make sure that we are not back here again. And I believe that this witness also wants to provide some context for the situation. Based on what I think they are going to say, I would recommend a similar resolution of a potential 30-day suspension that would not go in effect if they were to pay a $1,500 civil penalty.
Thank you, Mr. Prosecutor. We will go ahead and make the motion for your plea of guilty. We will then, on the second motion, we'll ask you to come forward and stay where you are and speak to the board as well. Is there a motion to find Shell Food Mart located at 9095 Poplar Avenue guilty of a violation of the Germantown beer ordinance regarding the selling of beer to a minor? Is there a motion?
Move to approve.
There's a motion. Is there a second?
Whatever it is.
Second.
There's a motion and a second. Please call the roll.
Vice Mayor Gibson,
Yes.
Alderman Massey,
Yes.
Alderman Owens,
Yes.
Alderman Yonda,
Yes.
Alderman Sanders.
Yes.
Thank you, Board. The admission of guilt is properly noted and read into the record and voted upon. Is there a motion to suspend beer license for the Shell Food Market located at 9095 Poplar Avenue for 30 days or accept a $1,500 monetary penalty?
So moved.
Do we not hear the testimony first?
We're going to get it on. The motion needs to be made so that you can have discussion. So your point of order is well made.
Thank you.
even though you didn't ask for one. Alderman Yonda, did you make a motion?
Yes, sir.
All right, is there a second?
Second.
There is a motion and a second. Please come forward, you're already forward, if you want to state your name for the record, and if you'd like to speak to the beer board, go ahead.
Okay. My name is Turukan Mengistu, Tiruken Mengistu. I am the clerk over the Shell. On that particular day, I was a little bit concerned and distracted because I received a call from overseas about my sick mom, and I checked his ID and I overlooked it. And in between these days, I lost my mom and I was out of the country for her funeral. And this is the first time happened, and I'm really sorry, and I promise it won't be happen again.
Thank you. Thank you for your testimony today. Any questions of the applicant? Vice Mayor.
Not so much. I know Mr. Mangiani is going to come forward as well. I would simply say I'm sorry for your loss. And I think you can probably speak to what procedures you've put in place and reinforced with your employee.
Go ahead, if you'd like to go ahead and step forward and speak. Well, you can go ahead, Rick.
I got a ticket last year also, in 2 years ago, like in 2017. At the same time, I installed a beer check ID, where every clerk has to enter the ID, scan the ID to sell the beer. And I remind my clerk every day, almost every day, to check the ID, but it's just a mistake.
Understand. And so what you're saying is you have to actually physically enter the birth date if
No, we scan the ID. And
you
it
scan the
does
ID.
everything
Okay.
automatically, yeah.
Further questions for the proprietor? Alderman Sanders.
I'm just curious about this scanning device. What happens if a minor or someone with an expired ID and you scan that? What does it do?
It will decline the sale.
So it pops up
The
on the
system
screen or something?
The system will not allow it to sell. The message will pop up on the screen saying the person is not eligible to buy the beer.
And did you say you installed the scanner after your first violation?
It is correct.
But it wasn't used on September 17th of 19?
He explained her case, like she got a call and she was distracted because she got a call from overseas and her mom passed away and all that thing.
So is the scanner hooked, does it communicate with the cash register? If the cash register sees it's beer being sold, does it not require it to be scanned? It'll let the sale go through without being scanned?
Yeah, you can put manually too. It both works with the scanning and putting manually too.
So you were distracted. Did you put in something manual?
I just asked him, and he showed me that he showed ID, and I see the year, but I overlooked the month and the date.
So basically,
That's right.
she did not scan the ID. That was the mistake. If she would have scanned the ID, we wouldn't be here today.
Okay, thank you.
Any further questions for the proprietor? Please call the roll.
Vice Mayor Gibson,
yes.
Alderman Massey,
Yes.
Alderman Owens,
Yes.
Alderman Yonda,
Yes.
Alderman Sanders.
Yes.
I think that the mitigating circumstances, so we do apologize for your loss. And Rick, I've known you for a long time. You had about a 15-year run of having any violations, so let's continue back on that track, okay? That concludes the beer board business this evening. We are adjourned.